support the truth. Don't look away.
Monday morning, November 24th, 2014, Culver City, California. The sun is shining over the Sony Pictures lot, a symbol of Hollywood's golden power. Employees settle in with their coffees, expecting another week of deals and deadlines. But when they open their laptops, the screens don't show their desktops. They go black. Then, a bright red skeleton flashes into existence. Below it, a message in broken English that sends a chill down the spine. We've already warned you, and this is just the beginning. Silence sweeps across the open-plan offices, broken only by the frantic clicking of useless mice. Phones stop ringing, email servers die. In seconds, a multi-billion-dollar corporation is brought to its knees, blind and deaf. But this wasn't just a prank. It wasn't a ransom attempt for money. It was a declaration of war, a digital assault launched by a sovereign nation against a movie studio over a comedy film. The world was about to ask a terrifying question. How could a Seth Rogen movie almost trigger a nuclear conflict? To understand the chaos, we have to rewind to a pitch meeting in Los Angeles months earlier. The idea seems simple, absurd even. A comedy titled The Interview. The plot? Two bumbling American journalists land an exclusive interview with Kim Jong-un, only to be recruited by the CIA to assassinate him. In Hollywood, it was satire. It was free speech. It was just a movie. But 5,000 miles away, in the hermetic kingdom of North Korea, it was seen as something else entirely. An act of terrorism. A direct insult to a living deity. The warnings came early, but they were ignored. Pyongyang wrote a formal letter to the United Nations, declaring the film's distribution an act of war that would be met with a merciless countermeasure. The State Department shrugged. Sony executives, confident in the First Amendment and projected box office returns, pushed forward. They edited a few scenes, digitally removed some military insignias, and thought that would be enough. They didn't realize they weren't dealing with a diplomat. They were provoking a sleeping dragon with a very sophisticated digital army. While the marketing team was cutting trailers, a shadow entity was already inside the gates. They called themselves the Guardians of Peace, or GOP. Intelligence agencies would later link them to the Lazarus Group, North Korea's elite cyber warfare unit. These weren't kids in a basement. These were state-sponsored ghosts. They didn't smash the front door down. They slipped through a crack in the digital foundation. Maybe it was a phishing email opened by a tired IT admin. Maybe it was a neglected server port. It doesn't matter how they got in. What matters is what they did once they were inside. For months, the hackers lived in Sony's network. Silent, invisible. They were digital voyeurs, mapping the infrastructure of a global media giant. They had administrator access. They read the emails of the co-chairman. They watched unreleased films. They scanned employee social security numbers, medical records, and salary data. They sat patiently, collecting terabytes of leverage, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was the digital equivalent of a burglar sitting in your living room for 3 months, watching you sleep, learning your routine, sharpening a knife, all while you planned your Christmas party. The bomb was already planted. Sony just didn't know the fuse was lit. It started as a trickle, then it became a flood. In the days following the blackout, the hackers didn't just hold the data for ransom. They weaponized it. They released 5 unreleased blockbuster films onto file-sharing sites. Fury, Annie, Still Alice investments worth hundreds of millions of dollars were suddenly free for anyone to download. But piracy was the least of Sony's problems. The Guardians of Peace began dumping internal emails. The private, petty, and often brutal conversations of Hollywood's elite were suddenly public property. The investigation room was a pressure cooker. Sony hired Mandiant, the elite cybersecurity firm known as the emergency room of the internet. They flew in teams of forensic experts who worked side by side with the FBI. What they found in the server logs was terrifying in its simplicity. The malware, dubbed Destover, didn't just steal files, it wiped the master boot records. It was designed to destroy the infrastructure permanently. It was a scorched earth policy. The forensic analysts began piecing together the digital fingerprints. They found lines of code compiled on Korean language machines. They found timestamps that perfectly aligned with the working hours of a specific time zone in East Asia. The ghost had a shape now. Inside the studio, the atmosphere was toxic. Paranoia reigned. Employees whispered in hallways, afraid to use their phones. Executives who had worked together for decades watched their relationships disintegrate as their insults about one another were broadcast on CNN. The leak revealed racist jokes about President Obama, disparaging remarks about A-list stars like Angelina Jolie, and the salaries of every single employee. The hackers had achieved something psychological. They turned the victims against each other. Sony was eating itself alive from the inside out. Then, the stakes escalated. from humiliation to terror. On December 16th, the Guardians of Peace issued a new message. This wasn't about emails anymore. They referenced the attacks of September 11th, 2001. They warned that the world will be full of fear if the interview was shown in theaters. They told people to remember the 11th of September and advised them to keep their distance from cinema halls. Suddenly, this wasn't a cybercrime story. It was a Homeland Security crisis. The Department of Homeland Security analyzed the threat. There was no specific intelligence of an active sleeper cell, but the fear was contagious. The sheer violation of the hack made the physical threat feel plausible. If they could walk through the firewalls of a multinational corporation, could they walk into a multiplex with a bomb? The major theater chains AMC, Regal, Cinemark blinked first. They refused to screen the film. They wouldn't risk the liability, or the lives. Sony was cornered. With no theaters to show the movie, they did the unthinkable. They capitulated. They announced the cancellation of the Christmas Day release of the interview. The hackers had won. A foreign dictator had successfully dictated what Americans could watch in their own country. The silence in Hollywood was deafening. It was a moment of total surrender. But the investigation wasn't over. The FBI took a rare, unprecedented step. Usually, the government is vague about cyber attribution. Not this time. They formally announced that the North Korean government was responsible for the attack. They cited the specific IP addresses, the malware similarities to previous attacks on South Korean banks, and the behavior of known North Korean cyber actors. Then, the President of the United States walked up to the podium. Barack Obama, in his end-of-year press conference, looked directly into the camera. He didn't mince words. He called the cancellation a mistake. He said, "We cannot have a society in which some dictator someplace can start imposing censorship here in the United States." It was a stinging public rebuke. The narrative shifted instantly. This was no longer about a bad comedy movie. It was about freedom of expression. The pressure flipped back onto Sony. They were down, bleeding, and humiliated, but now they had the backing of the White House to stand up and fight. The question was it too late to save the movie? And more importantly, to save face? The courtroom for this trial was not lined with mahogany panels, and there was no jury box filled with 12 peers. The courtroom was the global stage, the judges were the American public, and the venue was the internet itself. After President Obama's stinging rebuke, the atmosphere inside Sony shifted from paralyzed fear to desperate improvisation. They had been found guilty of cowardice by the President of the United States. Now, they had less than 48 hours to file an appeal. The executives, exhausted and battered, realized that burying the film was no longer an option. If they hid the interview, they weren't just writing off a $40 million budget, they were establishing a terrifying precedent that a foreign regime could edit the cultural output of the free world through digital bullying. The defense strategy was a logistical nightmare. The major theater chains, the Regals and AMCs of the world, had already recused themselves, terrified of liability lawsuits or mass casualty events. Sony had to look elsewhere. They turned to the independent theaters, the art houses, the mom-and-pop cinemas in places like Austin, Atlanta, and Detroit. These were venue owners who operated on thin margins but possessed a fierce streak of independence. While the corporate giants folded, these small owners raised their hands. They volunteered to screen the film, turning their lobbies into the front lines of a geopolitical standoff. Simultaneously, a high-stakes negotiation was happening in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. Sony needed a digital distribution network capable of handling millions of streams without crashing, and more importantly, a partner willing to paint a target on their own back. Google and Microsoft stepped into the fray. It was a gamble. By hosting the content, they were inviting the Guardians of Peace to turn their digital cannons toward YouTube and Xbox. But the decision was made. The verdict would be delivered on Christmas Day, not by a gavel, but by a download button. December 25th arrived under a cloud of unparalleled tension. In cities across America, the scenes outside the independent theaters looked less like movie premieres and more like political rallies. News helicopters circled overhead. Police cruisers idled at the curbs, their lights flashing blue and red against the holiday decorations. Security guards with metal detectors checked bags, looking for anything that ticked. The air was thick with a strange mixture of patriotism and dread. People who had never seen a Seth Rogen movie in their lives bought tickets. They stood in the freezing cold, holding signs about free speech, defiantly eating popcorn in the face of a terrorist threat. Inside the darkened theaters, as the projector lights flickered on, there was a collective, held breath. Every glitch in the audio, every flicker of the screen, sent a jolt of adrenaline through the audience. Was this it? Was the hack about to turn kinetic? But the movie played. The audience laughed. The credits rolled. Nothing exploded. Online, the verdict was even more decisive. At 10 a.m. Pacific time, the film went live. The floodgates opened. The Interview instantly became the top-selling movie on Google Play and YouTube Movies. In just 4 days, it would rake in over $15 million in online sales, shattering records for digital releases. The hackers had tried to erase the film from history. Instead, they had inadvertently engineered the most massive, viral marketing campaign the world had ever seen. The Guardians of Peace had demanded silence, and the world responded with a deafening roar of consumption. But the final sentence had yet to be handed down. While Americans were streaming the movie, something strange happened in North Korea. The Hermit Kingdom's internet, a tiny, fragile network of just over 1,000 IP addresses, began to wobble. Then, it collapsed. For 9 hours, the entire country vanished from the digital map. Government websites went dark. The elite's access to the outside world was severed. The United States government never officially claimed responsibility, maintaining a diplomatic silence. But the timing was too surgical to be a coincidence. It was a digital slap in the face, a reminder of the asymmetry of power. The message was clear. You can break our windows, but we can turn off your lights. The Guardians of Peace went silent. The hackers who had held Hollywood hostage for a month faded back into the static. The trial was over. The movie was out. The dust settled, but the landscape of Hollywood and the internet was permanently scarred. The Interview itself was, critically speaking, a mediocre comedy. Yet, it sits in history not as a film, but as a watershed moment in cyber warfare. It proved that in the 21st century, the battlefield has no borders. A keyboard in Pyongyang can shatter a boardroom in Culver City. The Sony hack cost the studio over $35 million in investigation and repairs, and led to the resignation of its co-chairman, Amy Pascal. It destroyed reputations and ended friendships. But the true legacy is in the fear it left behind. Corporations realize that firewalls aren't enough when the enemy is a nation-state. Cybersecurity budgets skyrocketed globally. Hollywood became more cautious, more sanitized. The idea that a foreign government could effectively veto American art had been tested, and while they lost the battle for the Interview, they arguably won the war of intimidation. How many scripts were never written? How many scenes were cut before filming even began? Because a studio executive remembered the chaos of Christmas 2014. In 2018, the US Department of Justice unsealed charges against Park Jin-hyuk, a North Korean programmer alleged to be part of the Lazarus Group. He was charged with the Sony hack, the WannaCry ransomware attack, and the theft of $81 million from the Central Bank of Bangladesh. He remains at large, a ghost in the machine, likely still sitting behind a screen somewhere, perhaps working on the next payload. The Sony hack was a warning shot that echoed around the world. It showed us that our digital lives are fragile glass houses, and there are people out there with plenty of stones. As you stream your next movie this Christmas, safe in your home, ask yourself, who is watching the watchers? And in a world where data is the ultimate weapon, are we ever truly safe, or are we just waiting for the next screen to go black?